Hi everyone, my name is Nat and I am the owner of Neighborhood Patterns. Today I'm going to show you how to make bias tape. I use bias tape in my pattern, the Block Party Pants, to create drawstring, finish the pockets, and hems. You can buy pre-made bias tape, but if you want a really unique bias tape, you're going to want to make it yourself. These are the tools that you're going to need. A clear gridded ruler. I like to use a cutting mat and rotary cutter, but you're also welcome to use a pair of fabric scissors. I like to use a little bit of chalk to mark, and you'll also need a fat quarter. You can, depending on how much bias binding you want to make, you might need 2 fat quarters or 3 fat quarters. I'm just going to be making it with 1 fat quarter today. So we're going to start by folding our fat quarter on the diagonal, like so. And then we can trim off this extra here. Our goal is to make a square. So I'm just going to cut this with my rotary cutter. And then I'm going to unfold and just connect along that line. I take this bottom edge, and I'm going to connect it to the top edge there. So I'm just flipping that. We're going to sew along this edge here with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Before we start sewing, we need to change our length to a 2. So I typically sew at about a 2.5. And we wanted to change to that before we start sewing our bias binding, because our bias binding, we don't have any back stitching, and so we want a smaller stitch length to make sure that the bias binding, when it's like sewn together, that it's really strong. So I recommend changing to a 2. Take that seam that we just sewed, and we're going to open it up with the wrong side up, and I'm going to press this seam open. We're going to cut our strips next, and the key with this is, depending on what width of bias tape you want, you're going to need a different width of strip. So we're making 1/2 inch bias tape, so we're going to cut our strips at 2 inches. And the reason for that is because it is going to fold 4 times total, so 2 divided by 4 is 1/2 inch. So very simply, we're just going to mark 2-inch strips like so. So you can take your chalk and go ahead and mark your strips. And this is why I like to use a gridded ruler, because it's really easy to see where we marked before and then just line up your 2-inch mark on that previous line. We're going to cut all of these. And actually, I'm going to switch to a different ruler. When I'm doing bias binding, I like using this really ginormous ruler because it just makes cutting so much faster. I can go all in one go. So I have all of my strips here, and I'm going to just lay them to the side and take them one by one. So I'm going to take my first 2, and you'll notice that it has this like diagonal shape at the top. We're just going to flip it so that we have right sides together, and those diagonals are now meeting up. And we're gonna sew this with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so because of that, we need to offset each corner just slightly. So it should look something like that. And if you want, you can pin them together, but I just like to go for it, to be honest. So we're just going to sew it at 1/4 inch, and we're still gonna have our 2 length, okay? And no need to backstitch here as long as you start at the very edge. So I'm actually gonna move mine back just slightly so it can be closer to the edge. Yeah, something more like that. And sometimes I like to hold these threads when I get started sewing. There we go. Okay, I'm just gonna sew all the way down. And when we get to the end, we're gonna take this piece that we've been sewing and flip it so that you see the right side. And then we're gonna take our next strip and we're gonna flip it so it's right side down. Lay it right directly on top. And we're going to pick up our presser foot with the needle in the down position. See how it's down right now versus up? Okay, so needle in the down position, lift the presser foot up, and I'm just gonna shimmy this new piece right next to this. And this is called chain piecing. We're gonna chain, or some people call it daisy chaining. We're just gonna chain all the way across. And then we can repeat. So we're taking the same piece, flipping it so it's right side up, taking our next bias piece with the right side facing down. Needle in the down position, lift up. And we're just going to repeat that until all of our bias strips have been sewn. So now you have something that looks like this, and we're just going to clip each individual one apart. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to clip to separate. And I'm going to do that for all of them. And now you'll have a nice long piece of bias. So before we press our bias binding into the folds, we're going to need to press each of these seams open. So I'm just going to do that for all of these seams. Just go ahead and press them open. What we're going to need to do is press our bias binding so that it's in half first. The next step is to use that center crease line, and it's going to be our guide. We're going to take each edge and fold it into the center crease. Okay, just like so. And then we'll repeat with the other side, folding it into the center crease. The very last step is to take our folded bias tape and fold it one last time in half. If you're not going to use your bias tape right away, I recommend wrapping it up. So I like to use my hand, and I just place it like so over my hand, just going slowly, making sure it doesn't get twisted as you go, just wrapping it up like so. Voila! You have yourself a whole little roll of bias tape in your unique fabric and choice.